A single explosive document was hidden in South Carolina's probate archives for over 8 decades. It was the last will and testament of Colonel Augustus Fairmont, and its opening line remains one of the most audacious declarations in antebellum history. In a society where legacy was built on name and blood, Fairmont disinherited his entire white aristocratic family. His wife of 26 years, his 3 children, his war hero brother. The sole heir to his vast empire, 1,400 acres, a Charleston townhouse, and immense wealth, was a woman whose name appeared in his ledgers under the cruelest designation: property. The will, dated March 1857, wasn't just a legal document. It was a calculated act of societal arson. It guaranteed a legal battle that would consume Charleston's elite and expose the raw, hidden truth beneath the city's veneer of Southern gentility. Tonight we uncover the secrets of the Fairmont estate and the woman who held the key to its destruction. If dark historical mysteries fascinate you, make sure you're subscribed to the Forgotten Liturgy. Hit that notification bell because stories that fundamentally shatter the foundation of the Old South do appear in history books. Tell us in the comments what state you're listening from right now. We love knowing where our audience discovers these dark corners of American history. Charleston in the 1850s was a masterpiece of hypocrisy. Columned mansions and church bells resting on a foundation of slavery. Colonel Augustus Fairmont, a decorated military man and pillar of society at 47, personified this wealthy, respectable facade. His plantation, Riverside, and his marriage to Margaret Louisa of the old Rutledge family were perfectly engineered for status. Yet this perfect performance was managed by a dangerous variable, Celia Russo. She was 28, unusually light-skinned and literate, purchased for an astronomical sum of $1,500 in 1843, a price that screamed secret. While the law considered her property, Celia commanded the household with an unsettling authority, managing Fairmont's correspondence, and living in the main house, a silent, educated figure whose very presence made Margaret Fairmont seethe. Southern society had an unspoken code for such hidden arrangements, but Fairmont had seemingly violated every one of them by giving Celia power and visibility. Now, as the Low Country suffered a severe drought and the nation itself fractured over issues like the Dred Scott decision, the atmosphere was ripe for chaos. With his wife and daughters in the city, and the weight of a world beginning to crack, Augustus Fairmont made his final, isolating move. On the evening of March 14, 1857, he summoned his attorney Josiah Prescott to Riverside, ready to unleash his devastating secret. The trusted courier specified that attorney Josiah Prescott should come alone with materials for a complex testamentary document. Prescott, serving the Fairmont family for 15 years, arrived on March 16th to find Colonel Fairmont in obvious physical distress, his face drawn and gray. More alarming was the sight of Celia seated in the study's leather chair, not serving, but composed, a deeply irregular arrangement for such a private business matter. Fairmont, refusing a doctor, explained, "I know exactly what's wrong with me. I need you to write a will tonight, and I need it done exactly as I dictate." Despite Prescott's palpable discomfort and professional objections, Fairmont's authority silenced him. The dictation lasted 3 hours, frequently interrupted by the colonel's pain. Fairmont began by granting Celia Russo her immediate and unconditional freedom upon his death. He then dictated the provisions that shattered all convention. "I further give and bequeath to the aforementioned Celia Russo, now to be known as Celia Russo Fairmont, the entirety of Riverside Plantation, including all land, buildings, equipment, livestock, and all persons currently held in bondage thereon." The bequest included the Charleston townhouse, the cotton factoring business, and all his assets. She was named sole executrix with full power. Prescott's pen stopped. He tried to advise, citing the legal impossibility of a woman of color owning such property and the required dower rights for his wife, Margaret Louisa Fairmont. Fairmont cut him short, demanding the minimum legal dower for his wife and ensuring she would have no voice in the administration of any property whatsoever. The shocking declarations continued. Fairmont acknowledged Celia's son, Daniel, 13, and daughter, Ruth, 10, as his natural children, directing they be raised as free individuals with all advantages. This explicit written acknowledgement of children born of an ongoing interracial relationship spanning 13 years was the ultimate violation of Charleston society's unspoken code. When Prescott pleaded with him to understand the consequences, the immediate contest, the societal rejection, Fairmont responded with unexpected venom. Charleston society built its fortune on systematic rape and called it breeding stock. The only difference, Josiah, is that I am telling the truth about it. Finally, the deepest secret was revealed. I am dying, Josiah. Dr. Middleton told me 6 months ago that the cancer spreading from my bowels would kill me within the year. He had perhaps weeks remaining, and he would not, could not, leave the earth knowing that his own children would be sold to settle debts, or that the woman I should have had the courage to marry openly will be returned to bondage when I die. The raw admission of a life lived as a coward hung in the air. For 2 hours, Prescott diligently worked through the technical details, crafting trust arrangements and precise wording to make the will ironclad against legal challenge. Fairmont insisted on reading every line and signed with a steady hand. Celia, Samuel, and Hannah, enslaved individuals who were literate, signed as witnesses, a blatant subversion of social protocol. When Prescott urged him to provide more for his legitimate children, Fairmont's reply was weary but firm. My legitimate children will inherit the protection of their mother's family name. Daniel and Ruth will inherit nothing but their freedom if I don't act now. The law sees them as things, Josiah. Prescott departed, knowing his silence protected a document that would destroy multiple lives. Augustus Fairmont lived for 6 more weeks at Riverside, cared for by Celia, who nursed him through pain and read to him from philosophy and poetry, a sight that scandalized the white overseers. His last words, according to house staff, were, "Tell them the truth, all of it." Fairmont died on April 28, 1857. 5 days later, on May 3rd, the family gathered at the Trad Street house for the reading of the will. Margaret, composed and dignified in black silk, her children Augustus Jr., Catherine, and Meg beside her, awaited the reading. Prescott, feeling like a man walking to his own execution, began. As Prescott read the clauses granting freedom to Celia, acknowledging Daniel and Ruth as Fairmont's natural children, and transferring the entirety of the estate to a woman who had been legally property, the silence was deafening. Then, chaos erupted. Augustus Jr. exploded, declaring it a forgery. James Rutledge demanded to know the identity of the witnesses. When Prescott revealed that the witnesses included enslaved people, the room erupted. Margaret remained seated and silent, her face hardening, showing not shock, but the confirmation of long-held, terrifying suspicions. She raised a hand, quieting the room, and asked with the cold precision of steel, "How long?" The attorney confessed the relationship spanned 13 years, with children born in 1844 and 1847. "For 19 years of our marriage," Margaret whispered, "while I bore his children, managed his household, he was—" She struggled to finish the thought. The final, terrible realization struck her. "And this woman, this Celia, she now owns my home, and my children inherit nothing." Prescott confirmed the worst. By the will's provisions, Fairmont's legitimate children received no direct bequests. Everything had been transferred to Celia and her children. Augustus Jr. immediately declared the will slavery's revenge, and his father mad. Prescott firmly countered. He understood exactly what he was doing. He stated explicitly that he was correcting an injustice. Margaret Fairmont, silent until now, stood up, her posture demanding attention. Where is she now? Where is the woman who has taken my life? She sent a chilling message to Riverside, requesting a meeting to discuss the terms of the will and to meet my husband, his other family. Celia's response was measured. She agreed to meet, but only with legal representation at Prescott's office, and only if Daniel and Ruth accompanied her. The scandal, meanwhile, had ignited Charleston society, splitting reactions between outrage at Fairmont's betrayal and fear of the will, its implications for the stability of all Southern property arrangements. The meeting on May 8th on Broad Street was immediate, visceral confrontation. Margaret arrived with a phalanx of attorneys. Celia arrived composed, dressed simply, accompanied by Daniel, 13, and Ruth, 10. both bearing the unmistakable Fairmont features. Margaret spoke first, voice controlled but sharp. "You understand that my husband's will cannot stand, that the law protects a wife's rights, that no court in South Carolina will allow this travesty." Celia met her gaze directly, violating every social code. "I understand that your husband chose to acknowledge the truth, finally." Margaret's composure cracked as she accused Celia of seduction. Celia's voice, level but intense, landed the counterblow. "I was 14 years old when your husband purchased me in Savannah. I didn't seduce anyone, Mrs. Fairmont. I assume you can imagine what else she was purchased for." She defended her right to be there, citing her 14 years of labor for the family. "I did all of it without choice, without legal protection, without the ability to say no." Margaret's attorney, Bogard Simmons, interjected, outlining the legal invalidity of the will, that a woman of color could not own property, and that children of an enslaved mother could not inherit. "Then why are we having this meeting?" Celia challenged. James Rutledge cleared his throat, admitting the truth. "A public court battle would expose the details of my brother-in-law's private life and scrutinize the children. They offered a settlement, freedom for Celia and her children, plus $20,000, a substantial sum, in exchange for renouncing all claim to the Fairmont estate and leaving South Carolina within 30 days. The $20,000 settlement offer, though substantial, was a fraction of the estate's true worth and required Celia to accept exile from the South. Celia refused, arguing that Fairmont knew she and her children would be vulnerable the moment he died. "I don't believe he would want me to accept 30 pieces of silver and disappear." Margaret's composure snapped. "How dare you quote scripture at me?" Her pent-up fury turned to raw human pain. "Did you love him?" Celia's response was complex. "I was 14 when he bought me. Whether that became love or simply the need to protect myself and my children, I don't know if I can answer." Daniel, 13, who had been silent, spoke directly to the room, his voice young but steady, challenging their sense of justice. "My father tried to give us what you take for granted. The right to own ourselves. How is it justice to take that away?" The directness of the child's plea silenced the room, but Margaret quickly regained control, instructing her attorney Simmons to proceed with the legal challenge, filing for probate in the Court of Common Pleas, arguing the will violated public policy, and that Celia exerted undue influence over a dying man. As they filed out, Margaret stopped Celia at the door and delivered a final, whispered, heartbreaking question. "He called your name when he was dying, didn't he? Not mine, not his children's, yours." Celia met her eyes and simply confirmed, "Yes." It was the last time the two women would speak. The legal battle began on May 15, 1857, but the case's timing proved critical. The Panic of 1857 struck that August, causing cotton prices and railroad stocks to plummet. The Fairmont business interests were hit catastrophically, and Riverside Plantation faced the real possibility of foreclosure. The crisis created a bizarre inversion. Celia Russo, technically still enslaved, was the legal executrix responsible for managing a financial catastrophe. She began making ruthless financial decisions. To prevent the total destruction of the estate and the foreclosure that would scatter all the enslaved people, she negotiated with creditors and, most controversially, sold 40 people from the Riverside workforce to a Mississippi planter for cash. This sale prevented foreclosure, securing the estate and her children's future, but it revealed the fundamental impossibility of her position. A woman who had been property was now forced to sell others into bondage to protect her own freedom. James Horth, one of the men sold, later testified that Celia had been crying, saying she had no choice, but she tried to keep families together. The sale of 40 enslaved people to stabilize the estate provided Margaret's attorneys with powerful ammunition. How could a woman claiming moral vision turn around and sell human beings? Grimbaugh's counter-argument was devastating. The Fairmont family's objection was not the act of selling, but that Celia, having been enslaved, had the audacity to make that decision. Their argument was about who had the right to exercise power. As the case dragged on, the witness testimony shattered the facade of Southern propriety. Sarah Yates, the cook, testified that Colonel Fairmont valued Celia's judgment and treated her with respect. When asked if he loved her, Yates said she didn't know about love, but he was different with her than he was with Mrs. Fairmont, quieter, like he could rest. The most damning witness was Dr. Robert Middleton, who revealed Augustus's full moral clarity. Middleton testified that Fairmont was not impaired. He explicitly stated he intended to provide for Celia and their children because he had fathered 5 children in his life, 3 with his wife, 2 with Celia, and he needed to ensure Daniel and Ruth were free. When asked why a rational man would commit such an act, Middleton looked directly at Margaret and stated, "Augustus said he was tired of lying. He lived his life according to rules that forced him to maintain 2 families, one public and one private. The greatest crime he committed wasn't the relationship with Celia. It was purchasing her in the first place, owning another human being, and fathering children into bondage." This testimony created deep fractures in Charleston society, turning the case from a dispute over a will into a confrontation with the entire structure of Southern life. A second crisis arrived in January 1858, when Ruth Fairmont, Celia's 10-year-old daughter, fell severely ill with scarlet fever. Margaret's attorneys tried to argue that Celia had no right to spend estate funds on the child. Judge Hamilton Pinckney, visibly struggling, ruled, "We will not allow a 10-year-old to die while lawyers argue about property rights. Miss Russo is authorized to use estate funds for the child's medical care." This was a powerful crack in the legal armor, publicly acknowledging Ruth's humanity over her status as property. By spring 1858, both sides were exhausted, and the estate was being consumed by legal fees. Then Thomas Grimbaugh made a crisis move. On March 12, 1858, he filed a new motion, going on the offensive by demanding a full accounting of how the Fairmont estate had been managed during Augustus's life, specifically focusing on all property purchases after 1843. The implication was clear. Grimbaugh had found a devastating secret in Augustus's papers. The hearing on the crucial motion took place on March 20, 1858. Grimbaugh, with controlled energy, held up a document found in Colonel Fairmont's private papers. A manumission document executed in Savannah, Georgia, on April 3, 1847. It granted freedom to Celia and was properly notarized. Margaret's face went white. Grimbaugh delivered the subsequent blows. The manumission was executed on the day Ruth Fairmont's, Celia's second daughter, birth, meaning Ruth was legally free since birth. Furthermore, a second manumission document, dated June 15, 1844, just 3 days after Daniel's birth, granted freedom to Celia and her infant son, Daniel. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Grimbaugh explained that Augustus had deliberately hidden these documents and maintained the fiction of their enslavement for protection. A free woman of color with white-looking children was in a precarious legal position, and it was safer for them to remain complicit in our own bondage than to risk kidnapping and sale. The will was not a manumission. It was the transfer of property from one free person to another, the culmination of a decade-long plan. Margaret's anguish was raw. He freed her on the day our daughter was born. While I was in childbed, risking my life, he was at the courthouse freeing his mistress. The psychological complexity of Augustus's actions was laid bare. He had freed the woman he loved, but forced her to live as property, creating a legal shelter while maintaining a social performance of ownership. Celia, speaking quietly to Daniel after the recess, confirmed the burden. "I think he knew that if I believed I was free, I would act differently, and that might put us all in danger." 2 weeks later, Judge Pinckney's ruling was delivered. He found the manumission documents valid. Celia had been free since 1847, her children since birth. The will stood. Margaret received her 1/3 dower right, but Celia Russo received control of the majority of the estate, the business interests, and the legal recognition of her status as a free woman of color. The verdict was upheld on appeal, and the legal battle was over. Celia Russo had won, but the victory was hollow. Margaret, exercising her dower right, chose to remain in the Trad Street house, forcing the 2 women to live under the same roof for 2 miserable years. The arrangement was psychologically unsustainable. Margaret finally surrendered in 1860, moving to her brother's plantation, having lost everything but the legal status of widow. Her children, Catherine and Augustus Jr., were effectively ruined, unable to marry or establish businesses due to their father's scandalous reputation. The fate of the Fairmont family was one of total ruin. Augustus Jr. disappeared into Texas after the war. Catherine lived an impoverished, unmarried life teaching piano. Young Mag's husband died at Gettysburg, and she worked as a governess. The Civil War itself accomplished what Margaret's lawyers could not. It destroyed the Fairmont estate. Riverside was ransacked, the fields burned, the business collapsed with the Confederacy. By 1865, the vast fortune that had fueled the bitter legal battle was dissolved in violence. But Celia and her children survived. Sensing the coming catastrophe, they left Charleston in 1860 before the war, using the remaining liquid assets to purchase property in Philadelphia. Celia invested wisely in a boarding house and a small shop, building a steady income. Daniel learned carpentry, married, and died in 1921, leaving property to his grandchildren. Ruth recovered from scarlet fever, became a teacher for freed children during Reconstruction, and her descendants became successful professionals, doctors, lawyers, teachers, achieving lives that would have been impossible in the world where she was born. Celia lived until 1889, never remarrying, and was buried under a headstone that read simply, Celia Russo Fairmont, 1819-1889, free. The Fairmont versus Fairmont estate case never became a standard legal textbook entry. It was too uncomfortable, too revealing. Charleston society successfully buried the whole affair beneath the tragedy of the Civil War. But the hundreds of pages of court documents survived, preserving the story of how one man tried to correct a lifetime of injustice, and how that attempt at redemption destroyed one family in the service of saving another. The core questions of the case remain unanswered. Was Augustus Fairmont a hero or a villain for having enslaved his own children? Was Celia a victim or someone who benefited from power? The historical record suggests they were all trapped in a system that corrupted every human relationship it touched. Augustus's attempt to be honest within a society built on lies only exposed how completely those lies had infected everything: family, law, love, parenthood. His will didn't fix what was broken. It simply revealed how broken it all was. The ultimate legacy of the Fairmont case was its demonstration of the unsustainability of the Southern social order. A system that required men to own their own children couldn't last. Though the Civil War would burn away the legal structures that made the case possible, the echoes of those systems remain embedded in the landscape. The Fairmont Plantation House still stands as a museum, its darker foundations rarely discussed. But in the courthouse archives, the case file remains, waiting for anyone curious enough to read the testimony of a world that tried very hard to keep its secrets. What do you think of this story? Did Augustus Fairmont find redemption in his final act? Or did he merely compound his crimes with one more act of cruelty, forcing 3 families to pay the price for his lifetime of cowardice? Leave your comment below. If you found this historical mystery compelling, subscribe to The Forgotten Liturgy for more true stories from America's darkest chapters. Hit that notification bell and share this video with someone who appreciates the complex.